Shedding a tear for his late father, Kim Jong-un has been hailed supreme commander of North Korea's military.
Kim Jong-un's reign of tyranny may be over soon. The current spotlight on North Korea has come because of recent reports that its supreme leader, Kim Jong-un, has sent 10,000 soldiers into Ukraine to assist his ally, Putin. The great successor of Pyongyang, who ascended to power in 2011, is now steadily declining from his throne in a heavy fall from grace. The young ruler arrived on the scene ready to keep alight his family's legacy of militarism, nationalism, and authoritarianism. But now, over a decade into his rule, his iron grip is beginning to loosen on North Korea. We know this because since 2011, there have been a reported 12 assassination attempts on his life, including an alleged biochemical attack pushed by the CIA and South Korean intelligence. Everything from economic decline, internal disloyalty, succession problems, and a weakening foreign policy has characterized his reign. And now we are watching Kim Jong-un spiral down. This little rocket man's time in office has been shrouded in controversy, and this unstoppable fall is going to be just as talk-worthy. Today, we're going to take a personal approach to understanding the North Korean dictator and journey together to answer the following questions. What was Kim Jong-un's early life like? How did he become the great successor? And what are his failures domestically and internationally? And finally, how is his poor decision-making accelerating to his downfall? Now, as you can imagine, videos like this expose the truth about certain leaders that are not very popular, and bots are under those videos, leaving negative comments that limit our reach. So, if you want to keep seeing videos like this on your suggestions page, please give our video a like, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. All right, let's get into this video. In an interview with Radio Free Asia, Tae Yong-ho, a high-ranking diplomat in North Korea who had defected to South Korea, stated that since Kim Jong-un came into power, the North Korean regime has become very unstable and gone in an abnormal direction over the past decade. A sure way to fall as a leader is to not have the support of your people. Even in dictatorships, public support, no matter how forced, is a hallmark of longevity. To show how much support Kim Jong-un is losing, the number of North Korean defectors to South Korea tripled in 2023. As soon as the border restrictions were eased post-COVID, it was like a mass migration took place. The majority of these people were students, women, and diplomats. Notably, even North Korea's elite class is leaving along with its Gen Z and millennials. When a survey was done among those who defected, 23% stated that they left because they had become discontent with the North Korean regime. Another 21% of the defectors stated that they had been forced to leave because of food shortages and the economic decline. The North Koreans have experienced 3 generations of misery, and unfortunately, their patience for the Kim dynasty has run out during Kim Jong-un's reign. Watching their counterpart, South Korea, thrive while the country continues to get poorer and poorer has led many North Koreans to question whether it's time to put an end to the Kim family's rule. What certainly does not help the situation are reports that the supreme leader's health is worsening, making people question if there's anyone in his camp competent enough to take over. For the first time, North Koreans believe this could be the perfect opportunity to rid themselves of Kim Jong-un's regime. Add to all this mess the reports that he has joined the war on Russia's side, the losing side, and you start to realize that the people's wishes may come sooner than expected. But before we pile on Kim Jong-un and talk about his failures, we need to talk about how he ended up in this mess. This is a young Kim Jong-un during his early life. There's a lot of secrecy covering his childhood, but we know that he was born on January 8th, 1984 to Kim Jong-il and Ko Young-hui. Kim Jong-il had many wives, but Kim Jong-un's mother was thought to be his favorite. She doted on her son, reportedly calling him the Morning Star King. There was a lot of controversy surrounding his mother because she was half Japanese. And because of that, she was largely hidden from the public. This has a lot to do with the Kim family wanting to portray the reigning family as purebred and elite. Because of her heritage, Kim Il-sung, Kim's grandmother, did not approve of her, and her marriage to Kim Jong-il was frowned upon. Before she met Kim Jong-il, Ko was a dancer for the Mansudae art troupe, which is a popular group of musicians known for propaganda performances that glorify the state and its leaders. Take a look at this clip, which shows the work that the group does. How How they got together is a mystery, but they had 3 children in the 1980s, including Kim Jong-un. The debate in many documentaries and discussions about her is whether she was a beloved mistress or Kim Jong-il's 3rd wife. Kim Jong-un had 2 other siblings, another brother named Kim Jong-chul, born in 1981, and his younger sister, Kim Yo-jong, who is the director of the Workers' Party Department of Propaganda and Agitation, who was born in 1987. His early childhood was spent hidden away from the world, and it is said that he and his siblings grew up in Switzerland. Before he left North Korea, he was never seen in public, and only a handful of Kim Jong-il's top officials were even allowed to meet him. His time in Switzerland as a child was a time of absolute luxury, which is very ironic considering the way that the average North Koreans live. Living off the North Korean people's hard-earned money, Kim's family had vast estates with horses, swimming pools, and bowling alleys. He reportedly had luxury vehicles adapted so that he could start driving them when he was just 7 years old. And there really wasn't anything that his mother didn't give him. Things like skiing in the Swiss Alps and swimming in the French Riviera were so normal to him that he probably had no idea what real life was like back home. Between 1993 and 2000, Kim Jong-un studied at many preparatory schools in Switzerland under a fake name. Many people believe that his name was Pak-un, and that he was the son of a Korean diplomat, so they left him alone. One of the known schools that he attended was the International School of Bern, which was a private English-language school that cost more than $20,000 a year in tuition. During his teenage years, his classmates had an opportunity to witness his character, and many of them said that Kim was extremely competitive, especially on the basketball court. According to a former classmate at the school that he attended in Bern, he didn't like to lose, and basketball was everything to him. As soon as it hit 5 p.m. every day, Kim Jong-un would be out the door. He would head to the basketball courts that were at the high school in the nearby city of Lübbenmatt, which was less than a 10-minute walk away. His basketball outfit was not surprising, very expensive. An authentic Chicago Bulls jersey with Michael Jordan's number 23, Bulls shorts, and his Air Jordan shoes. His equipment was also top of the line. A Spalding with the official mark of the NBA. During the basketball games, he would trash talk his opponents, and apparently, when he lost, he would curse loudly or bang his head on the wall. Later on in his life, we see this competitive streak leading to him to make some pretty crazy decisions. We'll be diving into this soon. Many believe that his love for basketball was fueled by his mother, who fed him the old Korean mother's tale that basketball made you taller. This must have appealed to Jong-un as a short child who secretly wore platform shoes to compensate for his height. Talk about a Napoleon complex. As crazy as it is to imagine, Jong-un was just a normal teenager who was obsessed with Hollywood movies and basketball players like Michael Jordan and Dennis Rodman. Although he was very sporty, his friends and his classmates say that he was not the sharpest tool in the toolbox. He was a second-tier student, so most of the time his teachers left him alone. And that was okay with Jong-un, who was satisfied with this academic averageness. His early life seemed to be pretty uneventful, and everybody who knew him stated then that he was fairly pleasant. In an interview with the Daily Beast, his early friend recalled this time with Kim, stating, "We had a lot of fun together. He was a good guy. Lots of kids liked him. I don't know anything about his life today. All I know is the guy I knew in school. He loved basketball. We played a lot together. I'd like to say to him, if you ever have the time, please contact me again so we can catch up." After his privileged life as a North Korean diplomat's son, the time came for Kim to take up his place in the North Korean courts. Now, recently, we crossed 1 million subscribers. Ever since then, we have been flooded with emails asking us questions and asking for advice about how to grow a YouTube channel. And even though we try our best to reply to every single email, sometimes this can take up too much time, or, people ask the same questions that we've answered before. So that's why we've decided to put all of our YouTube advice into one email bootcamp for completely free. So if you're someone interested in starting your own YouTube channel, you can get our email bootcamp by clicking on the link in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen. Okay, let's get back to the video. At that time, many had hope for change. He was coming from experiencing a liberal world in which ideas like democracy and free will were floating around. The general thought was that he would bring some of those ideals back home. Unfortunately, aside for his love for basketball, Kim Jong-un returned with nothing else from his time abroad. Between 2002 and 2007, Kim Jong-un attended Kim Il-sung University and Kim Il-sung Military University in Pyongyang. He graduated with a degree in physics from Kim Il-sung University and was commissioned as an army officer at the military school. After some time coasting by, it became clear that he was the chosen heir. Now, If you take a look at how the succession works in North Korean tradition, it does not make sense that Kim Jong-un became the successor. He had two brothers, Kim Jong-nam and Kim Jong-chul, who were both older than him. For a number of reasons, his father did not want Kim Jong-nam, who was the oldest, to be the successor. It is believed that he lacked the seriousness to run North Korea, and his time was marked with a lot of controversy. In 2001, Jong-nam was detained in Japan with a fake passport in a failed attempt to go to Tokyo Disneyland. He also had a lot of liberal ideas and even suggested reform that included North Korea opening up to the West. The second son, Kim Jong-chul's only failure was that he was too feminine, and his father felt that he could not lead because he looked like a little girl. Pretty harsh, right? One of Jong-chul's friends stated that he was the type of guy who wouldn't even harm a fly, and he could never have been the villain. Kim Jong-un was the perfect candidate, because he had something that his brothers didn't: seriousness. Even as a young child, Kim Jong-un would wear a military uniform at the age of 11. He had a Colt 45 pistol, which he always went around with. This should have been alarming for the people around him, but they thought it was cute, and now we have him in power. At his 8th birthday party, he wore a general's uniform with stars, and the real generals with real stars bowed to him and paid their respects to the boy, which was a foreshadowing of what his reality would be. According to stories by Kinji Fujimoto, Kim Jong-il's former sushi chef, it seemed like the plan had always been for Kim Jong-un to lead North Korea after his father. During Jong-un's 9th birthday banquet, Jong-il made the band play Footsteps and dedicated the song to his son. The lyrics of the song go, "Tramp, tramp, tramp, the footsteps of our General Kim, spreading the spirit of February, we the people march forward to a bright future." The song was performed at military parades and party congresses, so it was very symbolic that it was also being played at this 9-year-old's birthday party. Another thing Kim Jong-un had going for him was his physical resemblance to Kim Il-sung, his grandfather, who was the country's founder, leader, and the patriarch of the Kim family. The popularity that followed Kim Jong-un was cultic, and based on the belief that the Kims were a semi-divine dynasty who had a close affinity with the near-sacred Mount Paektu, which sits on the Korean-Chinese border. Kim Il-sung, Jong-un's grandfather, was believed to be heaven-sent, and it is said that he was born in a log cabin in Mount Paektu while his father was fighting the Japanese. He was known as the Bright Star of Mount Paektu, and soldiers spread the news of his birth by engraving it into trees across the country. While this was the official story, Soviet records indicate that Kim Il-sung was born a year earlier in Siberia. Media propaganda did a lot of work trying to paint him as this big guerrilla leader who single-handedly ended the war with Japan. The truth, unraveled, shows that he took advantage of a namesake who was renowned as a guerrilla leader. Brian Myers, an analyst of North Korea, stated that Kim Il-sung was not the big guerrilla hero, the big anti-Japanese hero he made himself out to be. In fact, he assumed the persona of a distinguished guerrilla leader with the name Kim Il-sung, and the real Kim Il-sung died in 1937. Japanese records of the interrogation of hundreds of Korean independence fighters from the 1930s show that the real Kim Il-sung, who led anti-Japanese guerrillas, was born in 1901 and was 160 centimeters tall. How he managed to get away with this lie is a mystery. Even his death was a mystical story, with reports that a Manchurian crane spotted in the city circled the statue of Kim Il-sung for hours before dropping its head and taking off towards Pyongyang. The Manchurian crane is the symbol of longevity in North Korea, and this was said to be a symbol of the fact that Il-sung was the eternal president. Currently, the eternal president lies embalmed at his former presidential palace, and his son, Kim Jong-il, is now lying in state at the Kumsusan Memorial Palace. These two leaders' birthdays have their own special place on the calendar and are celebrated as national holidays. And while we're on the subject of Kim Il-sung, let's talk about how he became the leader of North Korea. To escape Japanese rule, Kim Il-sung and his family fled to Manchuria, where he later joined a communist youth group. This group molded a lot of his ideology and is probably responsible for what North Korea is today. When Japan was defeated after World War II, Kim Il-sung returned to the newly divided North Korea and became the premier of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. As soon as he established himself, he began to spread his philosophy and make himself the great leader that everybody loved. To tie Kim Jong-un with this story, a lot of emphasis had to be placed on his bloodline and the Kim family legacy, which is that they were the revolutionaries who fought against the Japanese. Reports also say that Kim Jong-un was born of heaven, just like his grandfather, and this fed into the narrative that he is semi-divine. Another way that the Kim family sold the story was through the nicknames that were given to these leaders. Kim Il-sung was known as the nation's eternal president, or the great leader. His son, Kim Jong-il, was known as the dear leader, great comrade, supreme commander, and father. In the beginning, Kim Jong-un was called young general, then respected general in 2011, then finally great successor after his father's death. This sort of trained the people to think of the Kim family as royalty and made succession between the three generations pretty easy. Before we turn to the consolidation of his power, let us talk a little bit about the great successor's love life. In 2009, Kim Jong-un was married to Ri Sol-ju. Ri was a singer in North Korea's elite Unhasu Orchestra and a student at Kim Il-sung University, where she pursued a PhD in science. She is the daughter of a professor and obstetrician, and it is believed that her marriage was organized by her father. The first thing you will notice is that the portrayal of their marriage is different from Korean tradition, and is probably an appeal to the cyber generation. In the past, seeing any of Kim Jong-il's wives was rare, and all the pictures we have of Kim Jong-un's mother are from private occasions. Jong-un and his wife, on the other hand, attend musical performances together, and have been seen engaging with soldiers and workers. Ri Sol-ju has a more family-friendly image than the past president's wives, and does a lot of hosting, including hosting the state visit by the Chinese President Xi Jinping and his wife in 2019. She has been called a fashion icon and is known for wearing Western clothes and heels. Kim Jong-un is a lot more private about his children, but it is believed that they have 3 of them. The eldest is a son, but Kim Jong-un has been a lot more public about his daughter, Kim Ju-ae, with whom he has been seen in public. With his well-crafted media story, his rise to power was pretty swift. As a young adult, Kim Jong-un began accompanying his father on military inspections, slowly shadowing him and watching how he operated in his position. During that time, it was believed that he was either working for the ruling party, the North Korean Workers' Party, or in the Army's General Political Bureau. These 2 positions were significant because they were responsible for monitoring government officials during that time. In 2009, the whispers began about him being groomed to succeed after his father's passing. In that same year, he was made a candidate for the Supreme People's Assembly and given a powerful position as the chairman of the National Defense Commission. This body was a key structure in the government and was in charge of security and military affairs. It was first chaired by Kim Jong-un's father between 1993 and 2011, and then given to him. The position put a very young Jong-un in the driver's seat to make a lot of big decisions. This included the declaration of war, the approval of military budgets, and the appointing and dismissing of high-ranking military officials. Although this young man had never spent a day on the battlefield before, he began to be referred to as the brilliant comrade. From then on, his rise was meteoric. In June of 2009, he was named the head of the State Security Department, which is the government agency responsible for political control and counterintelligence. Kim Jong-un was also bestowed one of the highest honors to be given in North Korea, which was the rank of a 4-star general. The rank is also known as Taewon-sul, which is the equivalent of top general in European countries. In the US, Kim Jong-un would have been the general of the army, and in China he would have been Hyun Shai. This gave him ultimate authority in the Korean People's Army and direct access to the supreme commander. If it was not already obvious that he was taking over, this is the move that solidified everything. This was also blatant favoritism, considering the fact that commanders who had many more years of experience were waiting for the title but had been passed over. This move also happened right before the meeting of the Korean Workers' Party, which was basically like Jong-un's initiation into the political cult. All of this preparation and planning came to fruition in December of 2011, when Kim Jong-il passed on. After the tragedy, Kim Jong-un was declared the country's supreme leader, which made him the head of the government and North Korea's military forces. 27 years old, Kim Jong-un was formally appointed to his position on December 30th, 2011. In 2012, he continued to pile on the titles to consolidate his position and was made the first secretary of the KWP and chairman of the Central Military Commission. Now, we all know that the first move of any smart dictator is to annihilate all competition. Right from the beginning, Kim orchestrated a high-profile execution and purge. His first job was to eliminate all his father's enemies and his potential rivals. According to a think tank run by South Korea's spy agency, Kim executed or purged about 340 people during the first 5 years of his rule. One of the first family executions was the killing of his powerful uncle, Jang Song-tak. He was accused of treason and apparently had hatched a plan to overthrow Jong-un. The real reason, according to analysts, was that he had a lot of influence and posed a threat to Kim Jong-un. He also had a good relationship with China, and many speculated that Kim Jong-un was jealous of that. Kim made sure to make a public spectacle of his execution as a warning to all of his rivals. Before he was executed, he was stripped of his titles and escorted out of a public party meeting on state TV. Another important assassination was that of military chief Ri Yong-ho. Kim Jong-un thought that he would be a potential enemy down the line, and wanted to employ generals who were young and blindly loyal to him. Again, in a public display of humiliation, Ri Yong-ho was removed from the general staff of the Korean army. Later, in 2016, There were reports that he was executed by a firing squad because of his disloyalty to Kim Jong-un. Another important assassination that people believe was Jong-un's doing was the assassination of his half-brother, Kim Jong-nam. We spoke about him earlier, and it is alleged that he had been living in exile since 2003. He had fallen out with his father after he criticized his ruling style. But simply, he just did not fit into the image of what a member of the Kim dynasty was. He was liberal and favored the Western lifestyle. He loved luxury and spent a lot of time and money in casinos and hotels. If he had silently lived out his life away from Korea, Kim Jong-un would have just left him alone. However, during this time in exile, he caused a lot of trouble by writing letters about reform and democratization. When Kim Jong-un got into power, he knew that he had to do something about his brother. In 2017, when Nam was in Kuala Lumpur International Airport, this happened. Two women ambushed him and smeared him with VX nerve agent. The assassination was carried out by, and I'm sorry, I'm probably going to pronounce these names wrong, Siti Asya from Indonesia and Don Thi Huang from Vietnam. It's believed that they were chosen by the North Koreans to distance themselves from the assassination. The final move in Kim Jong-un's consolidation of power was awarding himself the title of Marshal of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The decision was jointly made by the Central Committee and the Central Military Commission of the Workers' Party of Korea, the National Defense Commission of the DPRK, and the Presidium of the Supreme People's Assembly of the DPRK. This announcement was considered a little extra and saw Jong-un's full assertion of his control over the army and over the country as a whole. This move was also symbolic, because it was a post held by both his grandfather and his father. On top of that move, Kim Jong-un also appointed his close ally Hwan Yong-ful in the position of vice marshal in the army. During a military meeting in Pyongyang, Hyun was introduced as chief of the general staff of the Korean People's Army. His reshuffling of the army positions early on was seen as a generational shakeup, and he was very intentional about replacing the old cats with new blood. Commenting on the title, Chung Seong-chung, I'm sure I pronounced that wrong, of the Sejong Institute said, "This is the only title left for Kim Jong-un to decorate himself with after he assumed almost all party and army positions." He also rewrote a lot of political institutions and structures to suit his ruling style. Before Kim Jong-il passed, he handpicked a lot of the elites around Kim Jong-un to work as his guardians. As soon as Kim Jong-un became the leader, he quickly dismantled this guardianship system and replaced his father's friends with his own loyalists. Jang Sung-taek, his uncle, was a key figure in the guardianship system, and his removal changed a lot of things in the party and the military. Kim Jong-un also removed about 260 key elites from the party cabinet and military. This was his way of stepping out of his father's shadow and setting his own pace. Kim Jong-un also expanded the power of the Workers' Party of Korea to make sure that his party remained loyal to him and kept control of North Korea. Later on, in June of 2016, the Congress of the Supreme People's Assembly revised the Constitution and solidified Kim Jong-un's position. A new organization called the State Affairs Commission was set up. Of course, Kim was its head, and it replaced the NDC as North Korea's most powerful governing agency. All the moves that Kim made early on in his tenure were so that he could have a seamless time in power, eradicating everything that could come back against him and solidifying everything that could hold him up was important. And next, Kim began working on his domestic policy. There are things that Kim did differently and things that he absorbed from his father and grandfather. During his first public speech on the 15th of April 2012, to mark the 100th anniversary of the birthday of his grandfather, Kim Jong-un promised to pursue his grandfather's Juche ideology and his father's military-first policy. So the word Juche translates to independence, and at the core of the principle was the idea that, as a people, it was important to rely on one's own strength. The philosophy borrowed a little something from Marxism, a pinch from Confucianism, and a dash from 20th century Japanese imperialism. In all realness, Juche has meant whatever the rule at the time needed it to mean. The philosophy is based on three basic elements: nature, society, and man. Under this philosophy, man transforms nature and is the master of society and his own destiny. What it meant collectively for North Korea as a country is that it must remain separate and distinct from the world. Kim Il-sung wanted to create a North Korea that was completely self-reliant and did not need any outside help. The important part of the Juche philosophy was that at the center of everything was the important guidance of a near godlike figure. The heart of Juche is the leader, and his duty is to develop the country and make sure that it remains self-reliant. Kim Il-sung's model of Juche was about making sure that the highest level of power was concentrated in the hands of the leader. This leader is known as the Sejong, the supreme leader, and at his command and direction, everything fell into place. Under Juche, the only person who possesses true consciousness is the Seo-young. Don Baker, a scholar of Korean philosophy at the University of British Columbia, summarized it perfectly when he said, "Human beings don't need God. They now have the Kim family." This all sounds very cultish, if you ask me. The Seo-young is so important to the North Korean people that, to this day, they visit statues of Kim Il-sung when they get married. Under this ideology, everybody's expected to have total loyalty. There is also a reason why the ideology is so vague and abstract. It gives whichever Kim is in power the political flexibility to use it to their benefit. The Kims even managed to use the Juche ideology to justify the economic turmoil that North Korea was in at that time. Juche is all about self-sacrifice and hard work. Therefore, it is the people's labor that determines how the nation thrives. Anytime that there was any shortfall, the media campaigns would push for increased production and longer labor hours. Under Juche, the leader is never the problem, and this ideology protected the reign of the Kims. Kim Jong-un has taken more of a creative approach to this ideology, and he has been using it to justify the regime's nuclear policy. Jong-un has referred to nuclear bombs as the treasured sword of Juche, and weapons as the Juche shells. In terms of this economic policy, we have to admit that Kim Jong-un inherited a world of trouble. The one-party dictatorship style of leadership had run the economy into the ground, and it did not help that North Korea wanted to be self-reliant and try to fix everything from within. What was most frustrating was that China and Vietnam had also begun experiencing the same economic difficulties as North Korea, but somehow their economies had surpassed North Korea's. Kim Jong-un tried to fix these problems in 2013 by developing his own ideology, known as Byungjin. The idea behind Byungjin was that building up the economy was just as important as building up the military. This was a departure from what his predecessors stood for, as they believed that Koreans needed to suffer for the nation to survive. Because his father and grandfather did not care about the economy, Kim Jong-un had to come up with things from scratch. During the 7th Party Congress, Kim set out some measures for the improvement of the country. The first thing he had to do away with was the overemphasis on internal self-reliance and open up a foreign trade. To do this, he outlined a 5-year plan that was meant to run from 2016 to 2021. Under this plan, there would be an increase in trade and exports with a focus on joint ventures with foreign sources. Internally, the state would become more active in managing enterprises and businesses. The first and most important aspect was food security. There would be an increase in agricultural development and an expansion of animal husbandry. Energy independence was the next thing, and one of the most important things to Kim Jong-un was reducing the reliance on China for fuel imports. Kim Jong-un's economy would be one of self-reliance and planning for the people. He would become a supreme organizer and have control over financial markets that he would manipulate to control prices. A lot of emphasis was also placed on the agricultural and mining industries because they made up 32.2% of the country's GDP. The plan, in all honesty, was a lot of bullet points with very little tangible how-to-dos. This meant that he was doomed from the start. The only active part of this plan was around agriculture and mining, where Kim Jong-un planned to work on expanding production and incentivizing farmers and miners. He saw some success in the beginning, but he couldn't really sustain it. An area that did flourish under Kim Jong-un was the construction sector, where many massive public projects were completed. Some of the famous ones are the Masikryong ski resort, water and amusement parks in Pyongyang, and the new passenger terminal at Sunan Airport. The resort was also built in line with Kim Jong-un's dream of ski tourism in North Korea. In December of 2013, the Masikryong ski resort opened. The most impressive part about the resort was how fast the building happened, with everything being completed in just 1 year. This was Kim Jong-un's dream for the resort, that it would be the location for the 2018 Winter Olympics. This project was part of a wider plan called the Wonsan Special Tourist Zone, announced in June 2014, which was meant to span over 154.4 square miles, or about 400 square kilometers. Before his death, Kim's father started doing some work in the tourism industry and signed several agreements with China to ease visa requirements for Chinese tourists. Jong-un's economic policy made tourism an important sector. And in 2013, he endorsed tourism and economic development districts and held knowledge-sharing conferences to discuss ways to make it boom. Although he did not end up hosting the 2018 Winter Olympics, the ski resort has massive popularity domestically and internationally. But the policy you guys probably know Kim Jong-un for best is his nuclear policy. The memes all over social media portray Kim as a fat little boy playing with his nuclear toys. The Kims before him had always been big on the military and nuclear modernization, but Jong-un took it to the next level. As we said earlier, Kim Jong-un wanted to build a policy that valued economic growth just as much as it did military development. The military-first policy, which was a big part of Kim Jong-il's reign, increased the role of the Korean People's Army in everything. The army began to participate even more in social and economic decision-making, from large-scale infrastructure development to providing its own food. It also had first priority when it came to funding and food. Maintaining a strong military presence in everything was how Kim Jong-il protected his regime and deterred any threats. Because of how important his military was to him, Kim Jong-il was willing to starve his people to spend extravagantly on defense. The difference between Kim Jong-il's policy and Jong-un's is that Jong-un tried to balance out the power a little more and focus on nuclear development. North Korea has always been obsessed with nukes, and in the 1960s, it sent its scientists into the Soviet Union to accumulate technology and experience. In the 1980s, North Korea started its nuclear program. The industry had 3,000 professionals and 200 top-class specialists who worked hard to develop these nukes. Making North Korea a formidable nuclear power is Jong-un's dream. On the domestic front, Kim believes that a successful nuclear program would create a favorable environment for regime survival. I mean, who wouldn't want to live in a country with the power to blow up the whole world? Kim Jong-un was thinking beyond his reign and wished to give his heirs something that would make sure the Kim family survived. On the foreign front, nuclear weapons are meant to keep foreign enemies at bay. In some ways, Jong-un believes that nuclear weapons will guarantee peace, economic prosperity, and happiness. On the 4th of October, 2014, the Foreign Ministry spokesman released a statement saying the DPRK was compelled to make a bold decision to have access to nuclear weapons due to the U.S. hostile policy towards the DRPK, nuclear threat, and strategy for stifling it for more than half a century. Basically, the messaging in North Korea was that the nuclear weapons program is necessary because of legitimate threats from the outside. During the 5th session of the 12th SPA held on April 13, 2012, the Constitution was revised to add a reference to North Korea as a nuclear state in the preamble. During this time, Kim had staged a very high number of weapons tests, and 4 of North Korea's 6 nuclear test explosions and all of its 3 intercontinental ballistic missile tests happened during his rule. Kim Jong-un's ultimate goal is to build the world's most powerful nuclear arsenal. This is where that competitive streak we were talking about earlier comes in. Only now it's not basketball, but global warfare. He's been looking to build an arsenal that rivals Russia and the US, and his focus is on having a diverse range of nuclear weapons. Jong-un wants to have everything from atomic bombs, hydrogen bombs, to even neutron bombs. The second classification of his nukes is also meant to be based on what type of strategic weapons he wants to use. Strategic nuclear weapons are the big guns with delivery systems designed to strike the opponent's large cities, while tactical nuclear weapons are made of a nuclear bomb and delivery system designed for striking the enemy forces and firepower, tanks, battleships, and command posts. Finally, battlefield nuclear weapons refers to the nuclear weapons fired with medium-range delivery systems to strike any target on the tactical battlefront. In 2013, Kim Jong-un held North Korea's 3rd nuclear test. The detonation happened underground, about 236.3 miles, about 300 kilometers, from the northeast of Pyongyang. The explosion was bigger than its 2009 test, measuring between magnitude 4.9 and 5.2, which corresponds to a weapon with an estimated explosive yield of 6 or 7 kilotons. Then, in 2014 and 2015, Jong-un began to develop a special type of missile. The 3 missiles were the Hwasong-5, Hwasong-6, and Rodong. The Hwasong-5 was the first ballistic missile to reach production status within the DPRK. It was mostly an older design that had smaller modern components added to it. Hwasong-5 production was eventually phased out in favor of the Hwasong-6, and it became the first design and production milestone of the DPRK's reorganized ballistic missile program. 2016 was a scary year for the international community because Kim Jong-un launched North Korea's 4th and 5th nuclear tests in the same year. The 4th test was quite low-key, and North Korea claimed to have conducted it underground. On state TV, Kim said the explosion came from a miniaturized hydrogen bomb and claimed it was a success. It was estimated that the explosive yield was between 4 and 6 kilotons, but observers can't really tell if it happened. The undeniable nuclear test of 2016 was definitely the 5th one. The seismic activity generated registered 5.3 in magnitude, accompanying an explosion of about 10 kilotons. This is about the same as the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This really alarmed the West. and the Obama administration worked to tighten sanctions on North Korea and declared that it would never recognize North Korea as a nuclear state. Unfortunately, no amount of sanctions or pushback could stop Kim Jong-un, and 2017 was an important year because it was the first time he tested out an intercontinental ballistic missile. What made this plan even scarier was the fact that he called his missile a package of gifts for U.S. Independence Day. On the 29th of November 2017, North Korea announced the successful test of a new ICBM, the Hwasong-15, which was apparently tested in an overnight launch. The reports claimed it reached an altitude of 2,830 miles, that's about 4,475 kilometers, and flew 590 miles, or about 950 kilometers. What terrified everybody was that its trajectory would have a range of at least 8,077 miles, about 13,000 kilometers, which means could hit the US. The Hwasong-15 is larger than the second stage of the Hwasong-14, indicating a larger engine. After the test, Kim Jong-un was satisfied and stated that he had finally realized the great historic cause of completing the state nuclear force. We're going to talk about his nuclear policy more when we discuss his foreign relations later, but for now, we need to see how his badly implemented internal policies are the reason that his reign is coming to an end quite soon. We will start at the heart of any nation, which is the economy. Earlier, we spoke about how the most frustrating part for most North Korean people is watching China and Vietnam flourish. The North Korean people have witnessed 3 generations of the same family, and they are realizing that they are not experiencing growth. It has been all about the Seryong at the expense of the people. Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il wasted a lot of time and money on projects like the Juche Idea Tower, the Triumphal Arch, and the Kim Il-sung Stadium in Pyongyang to push their agendas forward. These kinds of policies are the primary reason for the continuing slump in the North Korean economy. Right now, North Korea is among the world's poorest nations with widespread malnutrition. According to UN investigators, if North Korea does not fix its economic situation, there is a great risk of starvation. According to a report by Statistics Korea in 2023, North Korea's food production, including rice and barley, decreased by 4%, and its food shipments from China also dropped from 500,000 tons of rice in 2021 to 130,383 tons in 2022. The problem here is no longer just a policy one. Even if Kim Jong-un came up with new policies that could be implemented, there would be no energy or materials to run these factories. North Korea's economy is so heavily reliant on China's help, and that has crippled its ability to be juche. Something that is embarrassing is the fact that about 90% of fishing ships in North Korean waters are Chinese ships, and North Korea has to rely on these ships passing through for money. North Korea's own ships are of no use because the nation does not have enough oil to run them, and the fishermen cannot repair the broken down parts. This is at a time when the UN reports on global security show that more than 80% of North Koreans do not consume enough protein. Reports made between 2020 and 2022 stated that almost 12 million North Koreans, or about 45.5% of the population, are undernourished. Even Kim Jong-un has admitted that the regime has failed to guarantee its people's right to food. Do you know how bad things have to be for a supreme leader to admit defeat? Just think about that. In January of 2021, he even went as far as to admit that his 5-year economic development plan had failed during the North's first Workers' Party Congress meeting. The state rationing system has failed completely, and now trade has been happening on the black market. Although he tried really hard not to, he ended up carrying out a military-centric policy just like his patriarchs. In an economy where people cannot even eat, about 25 to 30% of the gross domestic product has been spent on defense, including the development of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. Then, the US sanctions that rocked Kim Jong-un as a result of his nuclear policy only dragged his country down further. Park Won-gon, a professor of North Korean studies at Seoul's Ewha Women's University, stated, "The nuclear weapons program, the economy, and the stability of the regime are all interconnected. If the nuclear issue doesn't get resolved, the economy doesn't get better, and that opens up the possibility of disquiet and confusion in North Korea's society." What has not helped the situation at all is the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic in the last few years. The pandemic has forced the government to step up to provide food, clothing, and housing for the people. All of these growing problems are fueling disloyalty to Kim Jong-un. The fact that he constantly needs to swap out leaders and politicians shows that there is distrust even in his own ranks. Furthermore, the North Korean propaganda machine is not doing what it did before. The mythical magic that was connected to the Kim name is waning, and people are really beginning to see their supreme leader as a failure. This is evident from the number of people who are going against his policies in the black market and creating free markets. The younger generation also also does not have the blind faith that the older generation had, so it has become a lot harder to subdue them. This new age of North Koreans has access to media and a knowledge of the outside world. They also have something to compare their government to. Many of them are obsessed with the popular South Korean dramas that show them what their counterparts are enjoying on the other side. They also have access to the stories of defectors and have seen what human rights organizations have to say about their beloved leader. The younger generation recognizes that North Korea is economically weak and sees no reason to risk their lives or blindly follow Kim Jong-un. When things got bad, the regime's food rationing system collapsed, and the people were left to fend for themselves to survive. This means that the younger generation grew accustomed to working the markets alone. This significantly diminished their loyalty because they did not need Kim Jong-un for anything. To make the situation worse for our dear supreme leader, even fear and terror are no longer working. The North Korean secret police has jailed, tortured, and killed hundreds of thousands of North Koreans. But people are more tired and frustrated than they are afraid. In an interview with the BBC, one brave woman named Sun Hwa agreed to tell her story. She referred to Kim Jong-un as the vampire leader who kept sucking the country dry. She explained that she lives with her husband and their 3 children, and on bad days they are forced to eat 1 meal of rice mixed with maize. She also revealed that ordinary people were living off the black market trades that they have made. She works as a trader selling street food, but also smuggles electronics on the side. Kim Jong-un's vision of centering the economy in the hands of the state has clearly failed. As the magic wears off, it is very unlikely that a 4th generation of the Kim dynasty will lead North Korea. That already low probability falls lower by the day as the people's voices gain momentum. As if the discontent is not enough to topple the Kim family, Kim Jong-un's failures are cementing the death of the Kim reign. You see, he's not as organized as his father was about choosing his heir. From an early age, his father had already started to groom him and prepare the public to receive him. But where is Jong-un's heir? The reason that his succession is such a hot topic now is because of his health problems, which we're gonna get into in a minute. In March of 2022, Kim's daughter, Ju-ae, first appeared with her father in the state media in front of a North Korean intercontinental ballistic missile. She's between 10 and 11 years old and is groomed as the heir of their reign. This is according to the South Korean National Intelligence Service, which has some pretty good sources. Kim Jong-un's eldest son is a young man who is too pale and thin to be the public's heir to the Kim dynasty. It seems that Jong-un has chosen to do things like his father. Remember his feminine brother? Kim's health problems are very bad. So if he were to die today, he could not give up leadership to his daughter. A rival to Kim's daughter is Kim's sister, Kim Yo-jong, who is the deputy director of the powerful Agitation and Propaganda Bureau of the KWP. Many people like her and have referred to her as the 2nd most powerful leader in North Korea. This scenario is just like the situation with his uncle, and if history is any reference, Kim Jong-un is going to try and get rid of her. She is quite powerful in her own right, so this could become a succession battle. According to South Korean intelligence assessments, Kim weighs over 308.6 pounds and is a heavy drinker and smoker. People close to him say that his preference are expensive champagnes, imported cheeses, Russian vodka, and cigarettes. He has diabetes, heart conditions, and severe insomnia. Still, short of a sudden cardiac arrest, Kim's personal health is well guarded. This is all alarming considering the fact that his father and grandfather died of heart disease. Things seem to be looking up for him when he lost weight in 2021, but recent pictures show that he has just gained it all back. Naturally, this has given rise to certain health challenges, and sources have reported that his aides have been trying to get new medications for his high blood pressure and diabetes. Things have gotten so bad that he sometimes disappears completely from the public eye in order to receive medical solutions. Even during certain public appearances, the situation has become obvious, and even his subjects can tell that his health is failing. Bong Yong-sik, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, a research fellow at Yonsei University Institute for North Korean Studies, reported he showed a problem with the breathing when he was walking to greet South Korea's President Moon Jae-in in their first meeting in 2018. How crazy is it to think that of all the problems in Kim Jong-un's life, his own health could be his greatest enemy? If he's unable to get this part of his life under control, the cause of his fall could be his death. If you think that Kim Jong-un handled his internal matters badly, wait until we get through the mess that is his foreign policy. The Juche policy that Kim Jong-un fought to uphold has alienated North Korea and made it a political pariah. His aggression and his forceful nuclear policy have led to sanctions and problems that go right back to the failed economic conditions we just discussed earlier. We will start off by describing how poorly he has been handling his relations with South Korea. Let us take a quick history lesson to understand how the two sides came to be. In 1910, the Korean peninsula belonged to Japan, and it took over and completely ended the Joseon Jong-un dynasty. Post-World War II came the Great Humbling of Japan, and its territory was taken away from it. The winners decided to divide the spoils into two parts. South Korea went to the US, and North Korea went to the Russians. From there, the two sides had the opportunity to establish separate governments. Both sides tried to fight it out, but after some time, they seemingly agreed to lead separate governments. North Korea has never been happy about the separation, and has viewed the division as the meddling of foreign powers in their politics. North Korea is also not a big fan of the fact that the US is forever meddling in South Korea's affairs, and it, therefore, has worked hard to try and end South Korea. The dream for North Korea has always been reunification, but talks about that have failed dismally. In January of this year, Kim Jong-un boldly declared that there would no longer be talks about reconciliation with South Korea. Kim Jong-un has based his decision on the fact that South Korea has been in bed with the US. Kim Jong-un has seen the increase in joint military exercises between the two as a threat, and their cooperation with Japan as treason. With everything that the South has done, Kim feels that reconciliation is impossible. Because of this, he wants it to be embedded into the Constitution that South Korea is a primary foe and invariable principal enemy. This new amendment will also make it clear that North Korea would pursue occupying, subjugating, and reclaiming South Korea as part of the North's territory if another war erupts on the Korean peninsula. It doesn't take a genius to see that this decision was unwise, and will undoubtedly undo decades of work towards diplomacy for North Korea. Kim also wants to remove all memories of cooperation between the two countries, and wants the talk of reconciliation and reunification to cease. Many people believe that the tensions have been the highest they have ever been, but the truth of the matter is that North Korea does not have the ability to take on South Korea right now. I mean, do we need to explain why war with South Korea would be a bad idea for Kim Jong-un? Well, for starters, South Korea is doing 10 times better than the North on all fronts. South Korea has pursued a policy that allows it to grow as a developed economy with a high GDP per capita. South Korea's economy growth rate stands at 2.5%, while North Korea is a measly 1.5%. North Korea's economic defeat is that it is largely closed off from the rest of the world, and heavily depends on China. South Korea's economy has been flourishing, and it has become a global leader in the world of technology. Powerhouses like Samsung, LG, and Hyundai hail from South Korea, and it has put them on the global map. South Korea's trade volume is sitting at 1.1 trillion US dollars, while North Korea's is sitting at a very low 5.5 billion US dollars. The difference is night and day. Having an export-led, market-oriented economy has really done wonders for South Korea, and it has really shown that it pays to be nice. The great economic disparity makes Kim Jong-un look bad, but it would also make it extremely unwise for him to be fighting this war instead of fixing his own economy. On the military front, South Korea has also been making steady developments. North Korea has had such a heavy focus on its military, but that does not mean that it will do better than South Korea in battle. Although its army is smaller than North Korea's, South Korea's military is well-trained and has technological advancements that North Korea just doesn't have. Another thing that Kim needs to realize is that he is not just up against South Korea. The US military alliance that exists means that North Korea would be up against that formidable force. The combined defense power of the US and South Korea is enough to completely destroy North Korea without even breaking a sweat. Treating South Korea as a foe and not an ally will be something that Kim Jong-un lives to regret. The nuclear threat that North Korea poses is a significant challenge to South Korea's independence. And because of that, plus North Korea's history of not sticking to pacts, Seoul is not willing to make deals with the devil. This is a realization that he is yet to have, however, because he currently continues to provoke South Korea at its borders through artillery strikes, which has further soured the relationship between the two. However, the outcome of this is clear. If Kim Jong-un tries to attack South Korea, that would be a sure way to end his rule in North Korea. The global condemnation that Kim would receive and the isolation would only worsen conditions for North Korea further. Speaking of global condemnation, we spoke about Kim Jong-un's nuclear policy earlier, but now we're going to talk about the implications it has had on the international community and how it embarrassed Kim Jong-un. No one was excited about the news that Kim Jong-un was upping the development of nukes in North Korea for obvious reasons, and immediately its actions were condemned. It seemed like there was a breakthrough in 2005, and North Korea pledged to abandon all nuclear weapons and existing nuclear programs. However, that agreement was short-lived, and North Korea continued to expand its nuclear program. program. During the Obama administration, there were many attempts to stop Kim, but they failed too. In 2011, Kim agreed to stop its nuclear tests in exchange for food aid. Again, this agreement was short-lived, and North Korea was back at it. In February of 2012, U.S. officials met with North Korea after the death of Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un agreed to suspend uranium enrichment as well as nuclear and long-range missile tests. But as you guessed it, he went back on his word yet again. In April, North Korea launched a long-range rocket, which failed and crashed into the sea. At this point, everybody was fed up with North Korea, and UN security condemned its actions and piled on sanctions. The most interesting time for this back and forth between the US and North Korea was definitely during the Trump administration. Trump had ambitions of humbling the little rocket man and restoring world order. At first, it seemed like Trump was a lot more aggressive in his approach and very trigger-happy in how he dealt with Jong-un. But surprisingly, it worked. In 2017, during his first address to the United Nations, Trump threatened to totally destroy North Korea. If the righteous many do not confront the wicked few, then evil will triumph. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission. The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. The North Korean ambassador walked out of that meeting, and Kim Jong-un's response was just as fiery. He began to threaten South Korea and stated that North Korea would not hesitate to attack. In 2018, the approach changed completely, and Kim Jong-un invited Trump for some talks. The two leaders met in Singapore and signed a joint statement aimed at a greater cooperation towards the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. I mean, this moment was historic, and it seemed like things were going to get better from there. In the following months, joint exercises between the South Korean and US militaries paused, and North Korea began dismantling testing and assembling facilities. Unfortunately, I have to ruin the good vibes by telling you that there was no happy ending. Only 2 months after the Singapore summit, reports came out that North Korea's nuclear program was back on track. From there, Trump maintained the sanctions, and North Korea continued conducting more rocket and ballistic missile tests. By 2020, the good vibes were over, and Kim Jong-un would not even listen to the Biden administration's plea for renegotiation. This aggressive approach to Kim Jong-un's nuclear program has done a lot of damage to North Korea. We cannot even begin to stress how bad these sanctions have been and how they have driven the economy further into the ground. Things got so bad that in 2021, Kim Jong-un was ready to talk it out with the US again. This statement was made after attempts were made to tackle the food shortages in the country. Kim Jong-un has been hit with sanctions from the UN Security Council, the US, and countries like Australia, Japan, and Canada. The Juche ideology does not work very well, does it? Disappointingly, in the middle of everything falling apart, Kim Jong-un is still fighting to hold on to his nuclear program. North Korea needs to seriously rethink how important being a nuclear power is if it can't even feed its own people. This nuclear policy has crippled North Korea, and it will inevitably end Kim Jong-un. Perhaps the worst of Kim Jong-un's foreign policy decisions is this one. The way I see it, joining Russia's side in the losing war with Ukraine is only going to drag Kim Jong-un further. It is unbelievable that even with a starving population, he has still managed to find enough resources to help out Russia. You can only imagine how this will be perceived by his people. The budding bromance between the two powers began to show when they reunited for a summit in September of last year. During their bilateral summit, the two leaders signed a comprehensive strategic partnership treaty to deepen their military ties. Reports show that Kim gifted Putin a luxury vehicle, and Putin returned the favor and gifted Kim an Urus vehicle. The main part of the agreement that we see playing out in real time is the promise that the two countries will provide assistance in the event of aggression against the other. Putin made it very clear that he was against Western deliveries of advanced long-range weaponry, including F-16 fighters, to Ukraine. In response to this, Russia has made it clear that it would not hesitate to cooperate with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Throughout the war, there has been reports that North Korea has provided assistance to Russia. In March of 2024, North Korea shipped around 7,000 containers filled with munitions and other military equipment to Russia. Kim Jong-un probably saw the war as the perfect opportunity to test out its weapons while acquiring a diplomatic ally at the same time. In September of 2023, after a summit between Kim and Putin, artillery shells, missiles, and other equipment began to arrive in Russia. In return, 9,000 mysterious Russian containers, likely filled with aid, were delivered. The UN Security Council suspects that Russia could be providing North Korea with fuel, defying sanctions that tightly cap the country's imports of oil and petroleum. North Korea is also probably receiving badly needed food, economic aid, and military assistance. Both countries denied these exchanges, but the video you just saw proves that the two are definitely in cahoots. In our previous videos, we have talked about the astonishing death toll in Russia, with 1,000 soldiers dying per day. What Kim Jong-un is doing right now is simply feeding Russia's death machine. There have already been reports of deaths, and North Korean engineers in the area have unfortunately been killed. North Korea cannot afford to lose military strength right now, especially with everything that is going on against South Korea. This type of escalation threatens to drag North Korea into the war as NATO and the West increase their support for Ukraine. This means that if NATO steps in to stop Russia, North Korea could expect to also catch some smoke in the process. If Putin also turns nuclear, as he's been threatening to do, North Korea may also get caught up in the mess, as NATO will respond immediately to both Putin and his allies. It has been over a decade since the beginning of Kim Jong-un's rule, and it looks like he's on his way out. Both internally and internationally, the odds are stacked against the great successor. He has failed to fix the economic problem that he inherited from his father, and North Korea is currently poorer than it has ever been. The bad thing is that the situation is getting even worse, and everything is deteriorating even faster than expected. Kim Jong-un has borrowed some bogus policies and developed some horrible ones of his own. These have been overly focused on maintaining his power, and very little attention has been paid to fixing the important plights of his people. Then, in relation to his foreign policy, Kim Jong-un has been making bad decisions throughout. Instead of trying to fix things with South Korea, he escalated the tensions and started a fight he would not be able to end. Then, to wrap it all up, he has chosen to side with Putin in the last couple of years in what will likely be his undoing. This was a desperate attempt to fight diplomatic isolation, but he had chosen the wrong friend, and such an act will only serve to drag him down. As things get worse for Putin, he could be going down with him. It's not at all wrong to say that Kim Jong-un is facing his untimely end.